Right, the physics terminology of a catalyst can almost guaranteed make you a millionaire. Now let me explain to you why a specific physics terminology can essentially make you really rich. So in this video, we are going to talk about the mechanism of a catalyst. Now, if you're studying physics or chemistry, you've probably heard this in many different variances, but basically a catalyst is a specific mechanism that will accelerate and speed up a specific chemical reaction. And according to a person called Mr. Oswald, there's a catalyst for every single chemical reaction. So out of the chemical periodic timetable, catalyst will exist in every single element. And so what is a basic example of a catalyst if you are not that good at physics, just like me, or chemistry? A very specific example is, for example, you're driving a car, let's say 20, 30 years ago, these cars were not developed like the cars we know today, didn't have a specific catalyst or basically a specific mechanism that would prevent their combustion engines or their engines to release a lot of these toxins. So in other words, around 30, 40, 50 or 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago, these cars and lorries and trucks, they would release a lot of that, antitoxins, carbon dioxides, all of these bad chemicals into the air. And that was mainly because there were not these catalysts that existed within the engine, if I'm not mistaken, during the time, that would basically reduce the amount of pollution or these negative chemicals that would go into the air. And obviously nowadays, that's definitely not the case. And so catalysts can basically be something positive or negative. It has no moral compass. It's not something that's just for positive or negative reaction. It just, at its fundamental first principle means that it just speeds up a specific chemical reaction. Now, before you click off this video, because I said, a very perhaps complicated physics term and how that will make you millionaire might be confusing, let me just explain. Because catalysts, what that basically is, it's a specific asymmetry, right? An asymmetry is, if you want to talk about mathematics, asymmetries is something that is exponential, right? And so where we have an x and y axis, unfortunately I can't draw today, but an x and y axis, and you have a line that just goes straight through, that is a linear graph, right? You've probably learned this in mathematics. An exponential graph is something that has a specific start, but then you see the line just goes up like crazy. So in other words, one specific input is not a constant value, right? I mean, in other words, a specific input can't tremendously increase over a specific period of time. And so that's essentially what asymmetry means, but it's not the point of this video. Now, asymmetries is what, I've made this clear in my other video, is what millionaires essentially look for. Asymmetries are specific inputs. A very basic example is the Pareto principle, right? When you give 20% of input, that yields 80% of output. Now, that's a very basic example of an asymmetry, but for the sense of this video, the specific asymmetry we'll talk about is a catalyst, right? And so catalyst, in a very basic understanding, can be very often misinterpreted as leverage, right? Or momentum, because it's almost the same thing, right? If you are doing something really well, for example, I don't know, you're doing a specific sport, you're playing basketball or volleyball, and then you're scoring a lot of goals, right? You have that momentum to keep scoring, right? And so imagine catalyst as that specific mechanism, right? That specific process that will just allow you to keep scoring, right? And so if you're asking, okay, where do these, specific catalysts exist, right? Because I made the example with the car earlier quite clear. Catalyst is not, it doesn't have to be something that's created, right? For example, the engine, that chemical in the air from the cars and trucks example, but catalysts actually exist everywhere in our lives, right? And so a very basic example of a catalyst, and catalysts, again, they have their own specific dimensions. Let's talk about a social catalyst. And a very specific social catalyst example that is actually the coronavirus. Because if you think about it, the coronavirus, despite all of its negative impacts on health and all of that scare and financial impacts it had because of it. One of the positive stuff, let's say, that Corona yielded in or resulted in is that people started like introducing hybrid work, right? I mean, suddenly we have universities lectures as well that are online too, and suddenly the entire environment has just shifted, that people started tolerating online hybrid / remote work even more, right? And so again, catalyst is not something that's positive or negative, and you might think, okay, well, there are the pros and cons, but this is not the point of this argument, right? The point is that the social catalyst, right, the social catalyst is the coronavirus, and has basically accelerated the entire process of online learning, right? That's just one example. There are other stuff like e-commerce business and online marketing, sales, and all those types of stuff. And that is another example of Corona being a social catalyst, right? Because it essentially exponentially exploded the demand for e-commerce and online business. Like, the online business transactions after coronavirus became crazy. You see not only that, but you see content creation and all these digital and info products just exploding out of nowhere, right? And so the coronavirus is an example of a social catalyst, right? And so, as I mentioned earlier, there are many different examples of catalysts. We have physics, we have chemistry, we have social, and we have different specific other areas. But another interesting area of a specific catalyst that I want you guys to look at is something known as an autocatalyst. Because autocatalyst, as it's in its word itself, auto means automatically, and that basically means that a catalyst has a self-rewarding or a self-enforcing system. So in other words, if the catalyst runs, it keeps running. And a very specific example that I would like to talk about is actually sleep. And so let's literally realize that sleep is actually a catalyst for something good, right? And it's specifically an auto catalyst. Now let me elaborate, because let's say that Monday and Tuesday you have a good night's sleep, and then so basically throughout Wednesday and Thursday, or even Monday and Tuesday, so Monday and Tuesday you had an amazing sleep, and because of that you were able to perform Monday and Tuesday, and you were able to submit all of your tasks, of your assignments, and you even, went to the gym and be able to finish most of your tasks, right? And so why is it an auto catalyst? Because Monday and Tuesday you had amazing days, right? Because you slept really well. And so because of that dopamine reward system that happens in your brain basically wants more of that rewards, right? That's the basic neuroscience of dopamine and the reward system. And because Monday and Tuesday you had 2 amazing days because of sleep, your brain wants that again, right? It wants to have more of these super cool, amazing, highly productive days. And what your brain basically does is it wants to sleep well again, right? It wants to sleep well again. So it wants you to go early and do all of that bed preparations that you do. And so with that being said, that is an example of an auto catalyst, because it's reinforcing yourself to basically do that again. And so if you understand the idea of a catalyst, right? And so from the way I see it, from my lens, is as a specific mechanism, right? A specific sequence of process that makes specific inputs either better, quicker, or faster, or in other words, more efficient. And so I want you guys to explore the idea of catalysts a little bit more and understand how having specific catalysts in your life can exponentially grow, right? Grow many metrics of your life and basically make you a millionaire, right? Because that's exactly what you're aiming for. And so with that being said, explore the idea of catalysts and see how you can be a millionaire through that.